I don't want to be buried in a pet cemetery, but I do want to tell you about it, even though sometimes dead is better. Here are 19 reasons to read Pet Sematary. Hi everyone, I'm Dave Musson at Dave Musson on Instagram, and welcome back to my channel, where most of the time I spend my time making videos going through the chronology of Stephen King and reviewing each one in the form of giving you 19 reasons to go and read all of the books he's written. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in more of, do check out the other videos on my channel. You'll find plenty of other ones to watch. In this video, it's time to round off 1983 with Pet Sematary. Quite possibly the bleakest and most fucked up thing that Mr. King has ever written, or at least ever published. Who knows what's hiding in his drawers. Let's not waste any more time. Here are 19 reasons to read this bleak but awesome book, and as always, there might be a few spoilers ahead. So King didn't want to publish this book, not because he thought it was bad, but because this was the book that scared him the most. Even now, he still finds himself horrified by the conclusions he draws in this story. Think about that for a moment. This is the book that scared Stephen King. If that's not good enough reason alone to read it, I don't know what is. So the idea that this was the book that scared King was, unsurprisingly, used across its advertising. I mean, that marketing campaign practically writes itself, doesn't it? So Pet Sematary was actually published out of business necessity rather than artistic ambition. So at the time, King had come to an arrangement to end his agreement with Doubleday, his publishers at the time, but he still owed them one more book before he could walk away. He had one book stored away in a trunk. That book was Pet Sematary. So he handed it over, the publishers were happy, King was happy, everyone was happy, until they read the book and then they got really sad. So because this was a book that King basically threw out to get out of his agreement with Doubleday, he wasn't really involved in any of the marketing around it, and he didn't give any interviews. And that, combined with the advertising hook of it being the book that scared Stephen King, gave it an added layer of mystique and intrigue, which undoubtedly helped drive those sales up and up and up. So let me quickly sum up the hook of this book. The hook is, well, things dying and coming back. All linked to a cute pet cemetery in the local woods that the nearby kids had made, and one a little bit beyond the deadfalls surrounding the cute cemetery that had a much more sinister edge to it, where the ground is sour. That's the horror hook of the book anyway. However, this book is actually much more about death and grief in particular. In fact, it's probably the most powerful and brutal analysis of grief that you will ever read. It's bleak, as well as beautiful at times, and is a very raw look at what loss might make somebody go and do. So King always talks about writing what you know, and in Pet Sematary there are a surprising amount of things that actually happened to him in his real life. So first was the setting. So in the late 70s, King was invited to be a writer in residence at the University of Maine in Orono. To facilitate this, he moved his entire family to a house in Orrington, Maine. And everything was fine about the house, except for the really busy main road that ran right outside it, just like in Pet Sematary. That road was full of fast, heavy trucks, and those trucks frequently claimed the lives of the local animals, hence the children creating the little pet cemetery. So this cemetery was in the woods near King's house, and according to King, it even had the sign on it with the incorrect spelling, which is where he took the title of the book from. Now, it wasn't just the cemetery that affected King in real life. There were two incidents involving his kids that kind of make their way into this novel. So first of all, King discovered his daughter's cat, Smucky, dead by the side of the road, having been hit by a truck, and they buried Smucky in the pet cemetery. King even heard his daughter later crying about it and shouting at God, complaining that if God wanted a cat, he should just get his own cat and not take hers, which is a line that's reflected in the book as well. Second, and probably more scary, was while the family were outside and his youngest son, Owen, who at that point was not even 2 years old, was flying a kite. He then started running towards the road in a scene that very clearly mirrors what happens in the novel. Now, thankfully, in real life, King was able to catch up with him and stop him before he went into the road. But the implications of the scenario kept whirring around in his imagination, and his brain kept asking, what if, what if, what if? And it turns out that he went and explored that in the pages of this book. Spoiler, it's not happy. Oh, and King also had nightmares about a reanimated corpse hanging out outside his window the night of the kite incident, which probably also had some effect on Pet Sematary. So the lead character is Lewis Creed, a doctor at the local university and the person who we follow as he descends into his own personal hell. He's so well written and so easy to empathise with that by the end, you're going with him and you can totally understand and appreciate the horrific actions that he ends up taking. So the other key character is the Creed's grizzled neighbour, Judd Crandall. Now, Judd is actually based on King's real life neighbour, a guy called Julio DeSantis, who was the first person to speak the line, "That road has used up a lot of animals." DeSantis actually owned a shop near the King home, and that shop had an empty room in it, and that empty room is where King went and sat down and wrote Pet Sematary. Okay, so I promised you a scary fucking book. So here's some quick fire reasons as to why Pet Sematary in particular will give you the shivers. Number 1, towards the start of the book, the death of Victor Pascal. Oof. Second, Judd's story at the time a human was buried in the Pet Sematary. Grim. Third, Zelda. Whoa. Fourth, the fight in the funeral home where the coffin gets tipped and you see a little glimpse of someone's hand. That fucking scarred me the first time I read it and has haunted me ever since. Fifth, the ending. Okay, let's lighten the mood a bit. The scene where Lewis gets a kinky handjob in the bathtub from his wife Rachel, that's pretty hot. So we know King likes to reference his own work in his books, and he does that a little bit in Pet Sematary, but nowhere near to the level he does in some of his other works. For example, in Pet Sematary, Rachel passes a sign to Jerusalem's Lot at one point, Lewis is pondering something about Derry at another point, and the most obvious is where Judd talks about a dog who went rabid a few years ago downstate and killed 4 people. It's Cooge! So lastly, the book's most famous line, "Sometimes dead is better," still haunts the man who wrote it. This is what he had to say in a new introduction to Pet Sematary that he wrote for a 2000 reprint. Bear with me. Perhaps "Sometimes dead is better" is grief's last lesson. The one we get to when we finally tire of jumping up and down on the plastic blisters and crying out for God to get his own cat or his own child and leave ours alone. That lesson suggests that in the end, we can only find peace in our human lives by accepting the will of the universe. That may sound like corny new age crap, but the alternative looks to me like a darkness too awful for such mortal creatures as us to bear. So there we go, 19 reasons to read Pet Sematary. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks as ever for checking out my channel, and if you enjoyed this video then feel free to subscribe. As I said at the start, there's loads more, and by subscribing you won't miss any future videos either. Oh, and if you feel like it, come on over to Instagram and say hi, where I'm at Dave Musson. Thanks as ever for watching. I'll be back with another one soon, but for now, take care and maybe don't go crossing any deadfalls, okay?